Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhi Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. Welcome back. We're continuing our study of the. We're now in the Aranyaka Parva, the third book of the Mahabharata, and in the last class we saw the introduction. We're right at the very beginning of the book, where Yudhishthira and his brothers and Draupadi, they are just entering the forest to begin their years of exile. And as soon as they enter the forest, they're met with by a group of Brahmanas who are begging for alms. And of course, the Pandavas have just lost everything. They have nothing to give, the Brahmanas. And so Yudhishthira explains, we've lost absolutely everything. And Yudhishthira is obviously in great grief. And he says, not only, he expresses grief. If you remember the last class, Yudhishthira expresses grief over two issues. One is he has lost everything. Second is that he's inflicted this miserable situation on his family. So he feels extremely bad for both reasons. So bad, if you remember where we left off at the last class, he actually falls to the ground in grief. He just falls. And in response, of the group of Brahmanas, there is one Brahmana named Shaunaka, not the same as the Shaunaka we talked before. It's like names get recycled, so this is a different Shaunaka. How many Lakshmis are there? I mean, my gosh. So names get recycled, that's nice. So this was another Shaunaka, Brahmana, who begins to give Yudhishthira and the others gathered nearby, give some very profound spiritual instructions for dealing with loss. And of course, we all undergo loss in life. Pandavas have lost their kingdom, have lost their wealth, have lost their status. So much they've lost. And they're grieving as a result. So how to deal with loss, how to deal with the grief that accompanies loss, and that's what we're entering into. This is Shaunaka's introduction. And we forgot to chant, I forgot to lead us in chanting of this opening verse. We can do that right now. Narayan namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim chaiva tato jayamudirayet. Shaunaka uvacha shokasthana sahasrani Bhayasthanan shatani cha Bhayasthanan Divase mudham Avishanti na panditam. We saw this verse at the end of the last class. We just see it briefly to set the stage for today's discussion. So Shaunaka is he's wise. And in fact, the introduction to Shaunaka described how wise he was. Vaishampayana, in our prior class, we saw Vaishampayana described how wise was Shaunaka. So Shaunaka observes that there are shokasthana sahasrani. There are thousands of opportunities in life for shoka, for grief, for sadness. Bhayasthana shatanicha. And there are hundreds of things to be afraid of. Thousands of reasons for grief and sadness, hundreds of things to be afraid of. And he admits this is a natural part of life. It is unavoidable. As long as you have 2 feet on this planet, you are subject to all of this. And he says, divase, day by day, avishanti mudham. Day by day, a mudha, a fool, is afflicted by all these problems. Na panditam. but not a wise person. So we discussed this, but just to recapture that discussion, is an enlightened person free from problems or free in spite of problems? Right? Not free from problems. As long as you're alive, you have problems. Do you have a body? Yeah. Does the body have a stomach? Yeah. Does the body have knees? Yeah, there's another one. Whatever the body has, body is made of parts. Everything made of parts is subject to, in fact, Puja Swami Tadatmananda liked to make this observation. He said, anything made of parts falls apart. Our body has lots of parts. It's already falling apart, and the only thing that's going to change in the coming years is it's going to fall apart more rapidly as the years go by. Okay, so no one can avoid the problems and challenges of life. Thousands of reasons for sadness, hundreds of things to be feared, and all of this affects an unenlightened person. None of this affects an enlightened person. The verb is interesting, avishanti. All of this literally enters into an unenlightened person. We have this curious American expression where we say problems get under your skin. They enter. On the other hand, for an enlightened person, they just, in fact, the metaphor is going to be used later, padma patramiva, just like a water on a lotus leaf. The problems just roll off. We'll see that in this very text. Okay. So this is how the Brahmana Shaunaka introduces this topic, addressing Yudhishthira and his great grief. He continues, Manaso dukkha moolam tu, manaso dukkha mool, sneha upalabhyate, sneha hityupalabhyate. Snehatu sajjate jantur, snehatu sajjate dukkha yogamupaiti cha, dukkha yogamupaiti cha. Very, very profound. He says, Manasaha dukkha moolam. What is the dukkha moolam? Moolam here doesn't mean root, except in a figurative sense. In a figurative sense, source. Dukkha moolam, the source of suffering. Manasaha, for the mind. And it really is the mind, right? When we talk about the parts of the body, including the stomach, when the stomach is upset, is it your stomach that suffers? Where do you register the suffering, so to speak? In your mind only. And Shaunaka understands this well. So he talks about the manasaha dukkha moolam, the source of suffering for the mind. All suffering takes place in your mind, which is why if your body is aching and in pain, sleep is a blessed relief. Because when you're asleep, when the mind ceases to function, what happens to your suffering? Gone. So he correctly identifies that the root of suffering is in the mind, not in the body. By the way, by extension, if the root of suffering is not in the body, it means it's not external, right? Which means, how about some other external sources of suffering? Do you have a really difficult boss, an obnoxious boss at work? Is he the source of suffering? External, like the body and stomach. Or somebody will complain about a mother-in-law, or this person or that person. Are they really the source of suffering? There's a lot of Vedanta in that one word, manasaha. The root of suffering is in the mind and nowhere else. And look at the mistake we make. If we blame our boss, for making us miserable. Blame the mother-in-law for making us miserable. Blame this person, that. Or we get real abstract. Blame the economy. That's right. The economy is the source of my suffering. Or blame the medical establishment. Blame the hospitals. Blame the government. How many people are in a rage about what the government is doing this, government is doing that? Some people are so passionate and so upset, and they suffer so much. Let's be very clear. The problem is not the government. The problem is not the medical establishment. The problem is not the mother-in-law or boss or economy. The problem is here. And that's good news. Right? If the problem is the economy, what can you do about it? If the problem is government, you get one vote. That's not very good. If the problem is your mother-in-law or boss, you're stuck with it. So the fact that the problem is here in our minds is actually good news. That's something we can do something about. It's a problem we can address. Thank goodness the problem is here. As Puja Swamiji would say, the problem is you, the solution is you. Good news. All right, so this is how Shaunaka begins. Manasaha dukkhamulam. The source of suffering, the root of suffering, is in the mind. And what is that root? And he uses such a wonderful word. We're going to spend some time talking about this word, sneha. Sneha iti upalabhyate. Iti, thus, upalabhyate. Thus it is perceived in the world that the root of suffering is sneha. Now, many of you know that word, sneha. It's a nice girl's name in North India. And it means love, of course. Many of you have heard us discuss it here in other contexts, and that's very significant, the choice of words. There are several words that mean love in Sanskrit. One of the most common ones is prema. Prema means love. Prema is derived from a verbal root, pri. Pri means to be pleased. So when someone pleases you, you feel prema, love. Good. Sneha also means love. Comes from the Sanskrit root snih. And snih, as a verbal root, has two primary meanings. One of which is love. The second of which is to stick. Pri only has one meaning. Only means to be pleased. That's really a primary meaning. But snih, unusually, has two perhaps equally commonly used meanings. One is to love, one is to stick. Which means we are invited to make a difference in our understanding between prema and sneha. Because prema means being pleased, and sneha also means love, but love with an association with stickiness. How about if we translate it as sticky love? Really, and the Sanskrit is wonderful. I've made this observation before. Sometimes people like to learn how to say "I love you" in different languages. So, mujhe prem karta hu. Is that the right? Something like that. Tujhe prem karta hu. There's something like that you say in Hindi. I don't know Hindi well at all. So then how will you say it in Sanskrit? You have to learn proper Sanskrit. As if I haven't learned proper Hindi, but I learned proper Sanskrit. So you say twayi snehyami. Twayi. To you, it's very interesting. To you, snehyami. When you say I love, the object of love goes in the locative case. I'm sorry to bore you with 2 minutes of Sanskrit, but there's an important point here. Honestly, listen. The object of love usually in Sanskrit language, whatever you're loving will go in the accusative case. I love you. You is in the accusative case. But in Sanskrit, the object of love goes into the locative case. In English, we would say to you. Tvayi snehyami. In English, if you were very literal, you'd say, I love to you. Now, that's very peculiar. Because if you use that root pri, the object is the word from which prema is derived. You use the accusative case. But only with this root snih, you use the locative case. Why? I love to you equally means I stick to you. The expression tvayi snehyami has both meanings. I love you and I stick to you. The point is that the word sneha was very deliberately chosen by the sage Shaunaka to establish the fact that we're talking about sticky love, possessive love, which I'm not sure deserves to be called love. Let's examine this. Sticky love, we can use the word attachment for sneha. And this kind of attachment is so often confused with love. And just, the most common kind of love, this so-called romantic love, if we call it that, romantic love is not, I don't think, can legitimately be called love at all. The more accurate expression is emotional dependence. What does it mean when two infatuated lovers tell each other, I love you? What does it mean? What does it suggest? It means, in your presence, I feel wonderful. In your absence, I feel empty and terrible. Means what? I depend on your presence to feel okay. That's emotional dependence. That's not love in the purest sense. Love in the purest sense. What in English we use the expression unconditional love. Unconditional love means loving unconditionally without any expectation for return. Now, consider these two lovers. I love you means I depend on you, I need you, which means I need you to be here. You better be here for me, because if you're not here for me, how will I live? What kind of, is that unconditional love? Hardly. It's emotional dependence. And it's likely that most of what we call love is not that unconditional love at all. Most of what we call love is highly colored by this emotional dependence, by attachment. And that even includes, the example that's so often given for unconditional love is a mother's love for her children. And perhaps among worldly examples, perhaps mother's love for children comes closest to unconditional. But is it unconditional? Is it really? Suppose this kid is now 18 years old, and he announces to his parents, Mom, I'm going to study in college. He's going to college. I'm going to study fine art. I'm going to study music. What is Mom's response? That's okay, dear, I love you. Now, without doubt, Mom's love comes closest, perhaps, to unconditional love. But please notice, Mom's emotional well-being is to some degree dependent on what the son does. Right? If mom's emotional well-being, let's take the big one. Mom, I'm gay. It happens to more families than you think. And I've met with many of those families over the years. I've met with them. And the families often struggle with this. Mom, I'm gay. What happens to mom's unconditional love? Wow! What kind of love is that? Mom is not all moms are devastated, but some are. What does that mean? It means that mom's emotional welfare depends on the son or daughter not being gay. That certainly is not unconditional love. It certainly is sneha. Love with attachment. Love with emotional dependence. Anything that you depend on is a source of attachment. In fact, he's going to make that point in the second half. So he begins by saying that sneha, sticky love. We could translate it as attachment. We could translate it as love mixed up with emotional dependence. That we can also translate it as conditional love. Love where there's a dependence or an expectation. That sneha iti upalabhyate is understood in the world to be the dukkha moolam, the source of all suffering. Why? He says, snehat tu sajjate jantuhu. Jantu, a person, is sajjate, becomes bound, snehat, because of sneha. Because of the sticky love, because of emotional dependence, you become bound. And bound here has a very specific meaning. It means bound to a life of suffering. You are stuck in a life of suffering. Why? Due to sneha, due to the sticky love, due to emotional dependence. And this is so clearly true. Look at this. Anything you depend on can be taken away. True? Anything you depend on for your well-being can be taken away. Begins with loved ones in our lives. We can lose our loved ones. Other things that you depend on. Do any of you depend on a car? Yeah. Do you depend on a job? Yeah. Do you depend on a house? Yes. Many of you really depend on your smartphone. I've noticed. So the point is, anything you depend on can go away, and when it's taken away from you, what is the consequence? How do you feel? When you lose something you really depend on, it's a big deal. On the other hand, suppose you lose something you don't depend on. Suppose you have reading glasses. You lose them. All right, you have another pair at home. You can go to the store and buy another pair for $2. Now you lose the reading glasses, who cares? You don't depend on that. It's just, it has a pragmatic value, but your well-being doesn't depend on maintaining possession of something trivial like reading glasses. On the other hand, if your well-being, and I'm sorry for being heavy, but this is pure Vedanta that Shaunaka is teaching to Yudhishthira, and in all honesty, Yudhishthira really needs this message. He's just fallen to the ground and he's probably weeping. Why? He's lost everything. Oh my God, I've lost everything. And what is Shaunaka's message? He says, you have created, I'll paraphrase wildly, Yudhishthira, you are suffering because of your own mind, because in your mind is so much emotional dependence on all the things you've lost. Yudhishthira, you lost your palace. Means you were emotionally dependent on your palace. You lost your wealth. If that's bothering you, you're emotionally dependent on that. You lost your status. You're emotionally dependent on that. Remember, Yudhishthira was also devastated because he hurt his family members. What does that suggest? That suggests that Yudhishthira's well-being was dependent also on his family members. And this is where things get really tricky. Because, watch what happens. Suppose your emotional welfare is dependent, let's get real, your spouse. Your emotional welfare is dependent on your spouse. Now, your spouse gets seriously sick. What is your response? If you are emotionally dependent on your spouse and your spouse is seriously sick, you get really shaky, right? If your spouse is seriously sick, because if your spouse is not healthy enough to take care of you, what will you do? And look at the irony. If your spouse is ill, your spouse needs your help, but you're kind of feeling shaky because you don't have your spouse's support. This is a setup for disaster. Emotional dependence. Please don't confuse emotional dependence with love. If you love your spouse and your spouse is sick, you'll dedicate yourself to caring for your spouse without worrying about how it might affect you. But generally, that worry about how it will affect me is mixed up with that love. There is genuine love. Absolutely, there is genuine love for the spouse, but this emotional dependence is also present. And it's that emotional dependence that's described by the word sneha. So, jantuhu sajjate, a person is bound to a life of suffering due to sneha, which we can translate now as emotional dependence. Whatever you are emotionally dependent on can become a source of suffering for you. If you're emotionally dependent on your house, your job, your car, your phone, or your family members. Your son who's just told you, Mom, I'm gay. If there is emotional dependence there, that will cause suffering for you and often will cause suffering for others as well. This is a problem of emotional dependence, and it's a problem that afflicts everyone except one who's enlightened. And we'll see that in the next verse. So he concludes here that snehat tu sajjate jantuhu. A person is bound to a life of suffering due to emotional dependence, and dukkha yogam upayati cha. And that person, as a result, upayati, gains dukkha yogam, gains suffering, becomes burdened with suffering. Due to emotional dependence, sneha, due to emotional dependence comes dukkha yogam, being burdened with sorrow. Wherever there is emotional dependence, suffering is guaranteed. Why? Whatever you depend on can go away. This is Shaunika's definition for the dukkha moolam, the root of all worldly suffering. Then you might wonder, well, how can I avoid that? Is it possible to be free from emotional dependence? You can answer that question, right? Is it possible to be free from emotional dependence? What are we studying? Right? Let's see. So here, Shaunaka gives the solution. He says, Jnananviteshu mukhe, no, Jnananviteshu mukheshu, Jnananviteshu mukhe, Shastrajñeshu kritatmasu, Shastrajñeshu kritatmasu. Nateshu sajjate sneha, nateshu tejate, padma patre shrivodakam, padma patre. But what about for ajnana anviteshu, with regard to those who are anvita, blessed with jnanam, knowledge, spiritual knowledge? What about for an enlightened person? Mukhyeshu, the foremost among the enlightened people, who are shastrajñeshu, amongst those who have learned through the scriptures, shastra, those who have learned through the scriptures. And what have they learned? As a result of the learning, did they become kritatmasu, amongst those who are, the term is kritatma, one whose atma is done, is a literal meaning of that word. But what it means is one who has discovered atma, one who has discovered one's true self. And this is really the key. What does it mean to be enlightened, jnananvita? What does it mean to know the scriptures, shastrajña? What does it mean to be mukhya, the foremost? What it means is to be atmakrit, one who has discovered his true nature. And why is that so significant? What is your true nature? What have you heard so many times about Atma being Sat, Chit? What is that third word? Ananda. Now, consider that. Ananda means full and complete. That expression, Atma Satchit Ananda, is an expression of a fact, a truth. And notice, the expression is not you are Satchit, just for fun. Can you imagine a scripture saying, you are Satchit Ananda from time to time? No scripture says that. You are Satchit Ananda is a statement of a permanent truth, of a fact, of an unchanging truth. And this is what the rishis discovered. They discovered the essence of who you are is unchanging consciousness that is boundaryless, limitless, full, and complete. Of course, the vast majority of people fail to recognize that truth about themselves. And here's the consequence. Tell me, if you recognized your true nature as absolutely full and complete, and recognizing your true nature as unchanging consciousness, you would also know that nothing could affect you. And nothing can affect you means nothing can add to your fullness, nothing can take away from your fullness. As Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he says it's like the ocean. All the rivers enter into the ocean, and the level doesn't go up. Why? The ocean is so full, it can't increase, nor can the ocean decrease. Suppose you discover your true nature as that consciousness which is so full and complete and perfect that nothing can add to it, and nothing can take away from it. Then, having made that discovery, you lose your smartphone. If you've really discovered, okay. Well, wait a minute, I can't check my emails right now. Okay, no problem. Suppose your car is stolen. Okay, I'll have to deal with it. Suppose your house burns down. Okay, I'll have to deal with it. Suppose a loved one passes away. Notice, no emotional dependence. For one who has discovered one's own true nature as full and complete, emotional dependence is gone. Sneha. Sneha is gone. Prema remains. Love remains. It's that sticky love. It's that attachment that goes away. And what a radical transformation that brings about in one's life. So look at this. Love between spouses. If one spouse is in a really bad mood, that tends to affect the other one. But if the other one is enlightened and your spouse is in a bad mood, you deal with it. It's not such a big deal because emotional dependence is gone. Generally, you depend on your spouse's emotional support. Let me go back to that point. I used it with the physical illness, it was a little heavy. Let me give it with the emotional problem. If you have emotional dependence on your spouse, on your parents, on your children, if your spouse, parents, or children is unable to give you the emotional support you need, you're in bad shape. But notice, when your spouse, children, or parents, okay, when they are suffering themselves, those are the times when they're probably not able to give you emotional support. They're suffering, they're unable to give you emotional support, and what is your response? They need emotional support, and you're getting hurt or angry or frustrated. What happens? Instead of giving them the support they need, you end up giving them a hard time. This is the trap of emotional dependence. How different that is from unconditional love. Unconditional love means love not burdened by emotional dependence. Prema without sneha, that stickiness. So, what he says here is that the enlightened person is kritatma, is one who has discovered one's innate fullness, completeness, perfection. Sometimes we use that simple word, that inner divinity. For one who has discovered that inner divinity, that fullness and completeness, what can you lose? Anything you lose won't really affect you. Go back to that ocean metaphor. Every day in the ocean, the sun is shining, and probably trillions of gallons of water are evaporating from the oceans every minute. Right? Every minute, trillions and trillions of gallons of water are being evaporated from the oceans. If the ocean could speak, would it say, "Oh, I'm losing all my water"? It was silly. No matter how much water evaporates from the ocean is unchanged. Suppose you discover you are utterly unchanged, no matter what is lost. This is what it means to be kritatma, one who has discovered his or her fullness, completeness. And what about these people? Teshu, for such people, sneha na sajate. For such people, that clingy love, sneha, emotional dependence, na sajate, does not bind them. Having discovered the fullness of oneself, that emotional dependence goes away. In the absence of emotional dependence, sneha is gone. Prema remains. Clingy, attached love is gone. What remains is unconditional love. So that sneha is gone, that clingy attachment is gone, and here's our famous metaphor, Padma patreshu eva udakam. Just like udaka, water, on a Padma patra. Padma, lotus, patra, leaf. So most of you know that the lotus leaf has a waxy surface, and when water falls on that waxy surface of the leaf, it beads up. It forms little droplets, and those droplets roll off the leaf, leaving not a trace of wetness behind. So the metaphor is that the water doesn't cling to the leaf. If you put water on other surfaces, it spreads out and clings. If you put it on fabric, it goes into the fabric. If you put it on another hard surface, it spreads out and clings to the surface. But on that lotus leaf, the water doesn't cling. Absence of clinging. Absence of sticky love. Absence of emotional dependence. I think that translation as emotional dependence is really important because it brings it home. We're not dealing with an abstract concept here. We're dealing with the reality of our lives, where there's a lot, for most people, there's a lot of emotional dependence. Why is there a lot of emotional dependence? It's normal. It's normal because one's own fullness and completeness is yet to be discovered. Okay, let's proceed. Ragabhibhuta purushaha, ragabhibhuta purushaha, kamena parikrishyate, kamena itcha sanjayate tasya, itcha sanjayate tatas Krishna pravartate, tatas Krishna pravartate. Purushaha, a person who is raga abhibhutaha, overcome by raga, desire, attraction, passion. Raga abhibhutaha purushaha, a person who is overcome by passion. What happens to that person? Parikrishyate. They are pulled about. You've heard me use the expression dragged about. Kamena parikrishyate. They are dragged about by their desires. Kamena. A person who is overcome by their passions is dragged about by their desires. This word parikrishyate, being dragged about. Do you like being bossed around? People telling you do this, do that, and no one likes being bossed around. We like being free to choose. But tell me, when you are overpowered by a desire, are you free to choose? This is not a common way of thinking, but it's a very Vedantic way of thinking, which is to say that your behavior gets hijacked by your desires. And we see that happen all the time. Intelligent, ethical people, because of their desires, end up making the most stupid blunders. Just as an example, I remember, this is many years ago, some of you will remember, it was a long time ago, when Bill Clinton was president. Remember when he got in trouble? So Bill Clinton, president of a country, has a cute young aide, and the president of the country can't manage his emotions sufficiently to avoid some improper contact with his girl. Do you think, wasn't Clinton smart enough? Of course he's smart enough. Does he understand the consequences of what he's doing? Of course he understood the consequences of what he's doing. He was a brilliant man, and perhaps a pretty good president, but what happened? He did this foolish thing, which led to, if you remember what happened, he was almost impeached for that stupid act. My gosh, what would make an intelligent, ethical person do such a stupid thing? Kamena parikrishyate. Parikrishyate. You are manipulated or dragged about Kamena, by desire. You're being bossed around by your own desires. And what I mean by that is this. There are two primary faculties we speak of, buddhi and manas. Buddhi, intellect, manas, in general, mind. Buddhi is that intentional part of your mental faculty. Manas is the part of your mind that you don't have control over. For example, do you have control over desire? Suppose you like a particular sweet. Did you choose to have that desire? Can you choose not to have that desire? Suppose you like this gulab jamun, you say. Fine, you didn't choose to have that desire, and if you do desire it, can you choose not to have that desire? Very clearly, kama, desire, belongs to your manas, the part of your mental faculties that you don't have direct control over, and it doesn't belong to your buddhi, intellect, which is a part of your mental faculty you do have control over. Now, generally in life, we employ our buddhi because our buddhi can discern dharma from adharma. It's actually going to be a topic we're going to see a little bit later, but it's coming up here. We'll let it come. With your intellect, you can discern dharma from adharma and then choose the right course of action. Think of Mr. Clinton. Could Bill Clinton discern dharma from adharma? Is he capable of doing that? Of course he is. Then what went wrong? The buddhi was not in charge. The buddhi was hijacked by the manas, by desire. And that's what this word parikrishyate means. Being dragged about, being hijacked. Having your intellect hijacked by your desires. Kamena parikrishyate. Then what happens? Ichha sanjayate tasya. So when your intellect is hijacked by your desires, then tasya, for that person, ichha sanjayate. Ichha, desire. Sanjayate, conquers you. You are conquered by desire. Tataha, then trishna pravartate. Then trishna will take place. Trishna will prevail. Trishna also means desire. There's actually something a little subtle going on in this verse. This verse tries to find as many synonyms for desire as possible. These are all synonyms for desire. Raga means desire, can have other meanings as well. In this verse, raga means desire, kama means desire, ichha means desire, trishna means desire. And this was done deliberately. So he thought, he said, how many ways can I say the word desire in one verse? And that's what he's done here. So what is the whole verse? Well, suppose we just translate them all as desire. Ragabi bhutaha purusha, a person who has overcome desire, kamena parikrishyate, is dragged about by their desires. Ichha sanjayate tasya, and then that person is conquered by their desires. Tataha trishna pravartate, thereafter desire prevails. So we don't need to make a distinction. There are some subtle shades of meaning between the words, but in this verse they simply all mean desire. And this is how we get in trouble. And then, how much trouble? Look how much trouble Clinton got into. And in fact, that really leads up to this next verse. He says, Trishna hi sarva papishta, Trishna hi sarva pape, nityod vega kari nrinam, nityod vega kari, adharma bahula chaiva, adharma bahula ghora papanubandhani, ghora papanubandhani. Trishna hi sarva papishta. Trishna, desire. Desire he indeed is sarva papishta, the worst of sinners. What an interesting expression. Papa is the worst of sinners. Reminds me, there's one famous verse in the Veda, it's part of a prayer, where the person praying for forgiveness says, I didn't do it, anger did it. I didn't do it, anger did it. So here, he's making the same point, and that is, Krishna, desire, is the root of all sinful action. And that's actually a very profound observation. Consider this. If you were utterly content, there was not a problem in your life, everything in your life was absolutely fine, no problems, you had perfect contentment in your life. In that condition, what could compel you to commit an act of adharma? Isn't that interesting to reflect on? If someone was utterly content, what would make them commit an act of dharma? And just to use, kind of a tragic modern example, think of these terrorists who are committing acts of horror. Suppose these terrorists somehow, I don't know, give them some drugs or make them meditate, do something to make them absolutely, I get the modern American English, make them chill. Suppose that terrorist committed to jihad in some way suddenly felt so content, so blissed out, maybe some drugs, I don't know. That terrorist, in that condition of total contentment, what could impel them to commit an act of terror? As long as they experience absolute contentment, nothing could impel them to commit an act of harm. But in the absence of that total contentment, capable of great harm, this is true not just of terrorists, this is true of us all. And that is, in the absence of contentment, which means when you are discontent, isn't that when we start to compromise our values? When you are really discontent, really unhappy, somebody is making you so angry and irritated, you usually don't say any harsh words, but when that person makes you sufficiently angry, we compromise our values and we can respond with adharma. So, Krishna, desire, is called the greatest of sinners here because what it means is the absence of contentment. The absence of contentment leads to adharmic actions. And he says further that trishna, there's more of a point to be made here, that trishna is nitya udvegakari, nirnam for people. This trishna is udvegakari. It is causing something to be stirred up. Causing something to be, nitya, always causing something to be stirred up in your heart. It's always stirring the pot, causing agitation, causing anxiety, causing worry. What does discontentment do? It causes all of that. You get upset, you get concerned, you get frustrated, you get angry. When we're frustrated and angry, then what happens? Adharma bahula cha eva. That trishna leads to bahula, leads to much adharma. When you're really this is true for people in general. When we really get angry and upset, we are capable of doing some really wrong things. So how wrong? ghora, frightening. That is to say, trishna, desire, can lead to horrible wrong acts, ghora, frightening acts, and this is which are papa anubandhani, which are full of sin, wrapped up with sinful actions. Now, just to make a connection to a prior discussion, when you are overcome by desire, trishna, when you are overcome, and that's the key word. We saw that word before, abhibhuta, in the prior verse, overcome. When you're overcome by desire, who's in charge? Buddhi or manas? Right? Buddhi is not in charge. And please note, buddhi is a faculty that can discriminate between dharma and adharma. Manas doesn't have the capacity to discriminate between dharma and adharma. Let's make that point clear. Your desires, we said you don't choose. They happen to us. So suppose you have a desire for something wrong. Mr. Clinton had a desire which was adharmic. Does that make Mr. Clinton a bad person? He didn't choose the desire. We all have desires. Most of those desires we have, most of them are dharmic. Some of them may not be. That's true for every human being. And it's true because we don't choose our desires. They happen to us. So a very important point is that a good person can have a desire for a dharma. It happens. A good person can have a desire for a dharma. Then you say, how can they be a good person? Easy. By not being overcome by that desire. Right? You can have a desire for something adharmic, but stay in control of your behavior, not pursue that desire. That's what qualifies a good person. Notice then that manas, mind, emotions can't discern the difference between dharma and adharma. Buddhi, intellect, discerns the difference between dharma and adharma, but when we are overcome by our emotions. Desire is an emotion, is it not? It is an emotion. When we are overcome by our emotions, who's in charge? Emotions are in charge. Manas is in charge. Buddhi has been hijacked. Trouble ensues. How much trouble? Depends. And here he gives a very extreme case. He says that desire is sarva papishta. It's the worst of sinners. It is ghora. It is frightening. It is papa anubandhani. It is caught up with sin. Dharma, adharma bahula. All right. Then, what can we do? Oh, he goes on. He's really this Shaunaka, this Brahmana, is really in a mood. He's really trying to shake up Yudhishthira. And he's doing a good job, I think. Let's see. Mano yasyendriya grama, mano yasyendriya vishayam pratichoditam, vishayam tasyaut sukhyam sambhavati, tasyaut sukhyam sambhavati, pravrittishchopa jayate, pravrittishchopa. Yasya manaha indriya grama vishayam prati choditam. Yasya, for a person whose manas, mind, is indriya grama vishayam prati choditam. A person whose mind is choditam, compelled. Very nice choice of words. A person whose mind is compelled towards what? Indriya grama vishayam, towards the whole world of objects. A person whose mind is compelled towards worldly objects. And just to make it pragmatic, suppose your doctor has really, and last time you saw your doctor, they got very strict. Look at your blood work. He shows you all these numbers. He explains what all these numbers mean, and he says, no more sweets. That's what your doctor says. And then suppose you're at this is holiday season, you're at a holiday party. And there on the table, what is there on the table? All the sweets. And what happens? Manas, mind, is choditam, compelled, prati, towards, compelled towards what? Towards all the sweets. Indriya grama vishayam. So your mind, and tasya, for that person, autsukyam sambhavati. For that, autsukyam. That person gets, look, that's my favorite sweet. You get excited about it. So normally you'd be okay, but your favorite sweet is there, and therefore pravrittihi cha upajayate, and therefore pravritti, engagement, action, upajayate is born. You are stirred to action, even though your doctor has warned you, even though your buddhi knows it's a wrong thing for you. You are chodita. You are compelled to pravritti, action which hasn't been chosen by you. Think about that. You go for that sweet, you know it's not good for you, you go and eat it anyway, knowing it's going to hurt you. What is going on? You would say, in fact, what do you say? I couldn't control myself, right? You say that. People say that. I couldn't control myself. What does that mean? It means you're out of control. Admit it. And if you can't control yourself over just sweets, what does that say for other things you might be attracted to? This is the problem. By the way, we need to see a sequence here. And we're going to see the sequence discussed in the next verse, but let's make it very clear. There's a step-by-step sequence that's described here in this verse and elsewhere. We really need to know this one clearly. So this verse ends with pravrittihi upajayate, action arises. So this sequence concludes with karma. Karma means action. And in this context, we're not talking about punya karma. We're talking about papa karma. So karma in general, but in this particular context, we're talking about being compelled to do papa karma. So what compels the papa karma? He says, autsukyam sambhavati. This sambhavati, this excitement arises. Why does this excitement arise? Due to desire, right? That's what our whole discussion has been. If you didn't desire that sweet, would you get excited about it and go to the table and eat it? No. It comes from desire. So therefore, action is a result of kama, desire. And this is a general truth for conventional human behavior, and that is to say that our actions, karma, are driven by kama, desire. Now, that doesn't only apply to papa karma, bad actions, it applies to punya karmas as well. Did you have a desire to come here this morning? Yeah, if you didn't have a desire, then you wouldn't have come. There are a few of you where your spouse had the desire. That happens sometimes. But generally, you have a desire to come, you came. So this works both ways. This works for punya karma, this works for papa karma. It means, in general, our behavior, our actions, karma, is determined by kama, desire. Then we back up one more stage. Why do we have kama? That's an interesting question. Why do we have desire? Why do we have attachment? Why do we have that sneha, that sticky love? Why do we have that emotional dependence? We talked about that several verses ago, where we talked about that one who is kritatma, one who has discovered his or her innate fullness, completeness, perfection. If you have discovered yourself to be as full and complete as the ocean, what would happen to your desire? Suppose you felt yourself to be so full and complete, and you saw that sweet on the table, and you said, even though I would like it, I know it's not healthy for me, and I'm okay without it. You could say that if you felt a sense of fullness and completeness within, you could walk past that table. But the problem is, for most people, we fail to recognize that innate fullness and completeness, the nature of Atma, your true self. Puja Swamiji used the term self-non-recognition. Wonderful term. Self-non-recognition. Failure to recognize your true nature as full and complete. And that is the cause for kama, desire. Failing to recognize yourself as full and complete is the cause for karma. Self-non-recognition is a fancy word for avidya, ignorance. And this is Vedanta 101. Avidya, ignorance, leads to kama, desire, leads to karma, action. And this describes the life of samsara. These three simple terms describes the whole thing, the whole problem of samsara. Here's how it works. You start off, as everyone does, with avidya, ignorance, not knowing your innate fullness and completeness. So not knowing your innate fullness and completeness, how do you feel? You feel incomplete, inadequate, and therefore you have desires. What do you desire? Whatever will make you feel complete. So, and when you have all these desires, what happens? As we've discussed, they compel you to act. And when you act, you commit a lot of karmas. And because of all those karmas you have committed, they don't all get exhausted in this life. So the karmas you commit in this life guarantee you to be reborn. Right? The karmas we commit in one life ensure that we will be reborn. And when you're reborn, are you born enlightened or are you born ignorant? There it is. This is how the rishis, this is how the sages envisioned the problem. An endless cycle. Avidya, ignorance, self, non-recognition, leading to desire. Desires that prompt actions. Actions which cause the accumulation of karma, and you get reborn again and again and again. This is the cycle of births that we talk about. This is what we call samsara, a life of worldly suffering, life after life after life. How to get out of this? It's pretty easy, relatively speaking, because one thing we know for sure is ignorance can be destroyed by knowledge. And that's why we're studying the Mahabharata, and we'll continue that study in the next class. In the next class, we'll finish this chapter, this section, and we'll start the next chapter, the next section, which is also really interesting. In the next section, we're going to see Draupadi railing against Yudhishthira. She's going to be saying, look what you got us into. You got us kicked out of our palace, and you caused all these problems. And she's also going to go railing on about Dushasana and Duryodhana, who insulted her so terribly. And she's just going to be railing against all these. Yudhishthira's job is to calm her down. And he's going to talk about forgiveness in a really beautiful and profound way. So that'll be the next topic we'll say. And the slides will be on our website maybe towards the end of the week. It'll take a few days. We'll have that available for you. Okay. A couple of quick announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our program for children at 11 o'clock. 5 o'clock is our usual mindful awareness meditation at 5. At 6:15, I'll be conducting an advanced meditation session. We're doing this on the first Sunday each month. If you are a skillful meditator, please come and join us. 6:15 for advanced meditation. It means nididhyasana, Vedanta contemplation. Also, this coming Friday, we have the Sadhaka Sangha program. Nice satsanga. I'll mention that Vasanti is going to be going to India for a while. So this is your last chance. So come, if you would like to come and see what that Sadhaka Sangha program is like. It's a nice program. So come on Friday at 10 o'clock. After that, then it'll be interrupted when she goes to India. Library will be open after class, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.